Pro Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network. Your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage. News, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers. Hey, Pro Football Playbook listeners. I'm Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. We're back, taking a look at roster evaluations across the league. We are up to the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Kansas City Chiefs in this show. Welcome in, Keith.
Yeah, a couple of teams on opposite ends of the spectrum, although I won't say that Jacksonville is less interesting than Kansas City, because to me they're not. That's an absolutely fascinating team, even though they're coming off being the first overall pick in the draft, and people are worried that they're not going to be very good. I think this is a very, very interesting team and roster.
Well, they've made some moves this year. I mean, nobody's going to accuse them of not spending any money or hiring a good coach or doing some things to help Trevor Lawrence be a better quarterback and surrounding him with some talent and some protection and all that kind of stuff. But it was interesting that the Trent Baalke thing, sitting on a pile of cash, I think he had like $56 or $58 million in cap availability before free agency, went out and just signed some ridiculous contracts. Seemed like he was competing against himself to set the market on a few different things. The Christian Kirk thing is the one I think that stands out the most, is just being kind of ridiculous, but I get it. They wanted to ensure that they got a playmaker like that. He hadn't really completely proved himself, I think, with the Arizona Cardinals, but now gets an opportunity to be a number 1 or number 2 overall wide receiver in their room, and maybe change the dynamic there of what they were trying to do. He never had a season over 1,000 yards receiving, but I'm not going to say that he doesn't have that ability. I just don't know if he was worth $75 million or whatever it was that he brought. They brought him in contract for.
Yeah, but I don't think it had anything to do with he's going to match this production based on that. This was a roster and a team and a situation where free agents didn't want to go. And in order to get talent there in the room, they had to overpay for it. And that will help, because once they've got talent there, then it will be easier to attract additional talent, because basically the view was just that the cupboard was too bare and nobody wanted to go there. So they overpaid. And while the Christian Kirk deal and some of the other ones they weren't great, I don't see these players reaching the end of those deals, right? They're going to play for a couple of years, and then their contracts are going to be replaced by ones that are more reasonable, because people are going to be more willing to move to Jacksonville.
I think that argument in a vacuum is fine. But when you take a look at the history of the Jacksonville Jaguars and just look at the last 10 years or so, they have a pattern of this. They have a pattern of going out, overspending, where deals end with nothing to show for it, no comp picks and all that kind of stuff. And then they have a couple of bad years. They get their books right again with dead money coming off the books, and they go out and make these deals that they don't expect to reach the end. And it's just, it's the same story all the time. So I was kind of hopeful that they would manage this a little better, just from a fan's perspective, that they could have sustained success is what they were looking for. Now, they did go out and get Doug Peterson to be their head coach. I think that's a good, solid foundation, a good start. He's a good coach. He surrounds everyone with good players, good coaches. There's an expectation level there that the team is going to rise up from where they're at least at the base level. Now they've got a coach to begin that with a nice franchise piece at quarterback. And so I thought there were some lateral moves, like the Brandon Scherf move I thought was okay, but you take a look at, he's just replacing Andy Norwell. So there's a little upgrade there. Yeah. But they went out and pile of cash to do that. The Miles Jack for Aluquan is an upgrade in my opinion. But again, it's a pile of cash to do that. And then the Christian Kirk thing I thought was just kind of ridiculous. The Evan Ingram tight end deal was kind of an overspend as well for that. But at the same time, I think that they did improve their roster. So they made those moves, yes. They overspent, yes, but they also added a bunch of talent that they didn't have on their roster prior.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the point. You're talking about sustained success. Well, they have to have success. I mean, this is a team that's been in the top 5 of the draft most of the last decade, and then they had a couple of years, one of which where they made the AFC title game, but then it all fell apart very quickly, where they ended up guys didn't want to play there anymore. They had to trade guys away, and they were back to nothing. And so this rebuild is one that they need to get moving. They got to get some things going, but they were having a hard time attracting free agents, and that's part of the problem. I just think that they're in a situation now, like you said, they've got a better coach. A year ago it was an absolute disaster.
That roster gave up. That roster gave up on that coach early, and then and the team just gave up. Going down the stretch, and so I'm worried a little bit about even Doug Peterson's ability to rally this team to get them mentally ready to play up to a certain level with the current roster. I mean, it seems like they would need to churn and burn a little bit of some of those players, and kind of just remake the whole thing.
Yeah, a little bit. I think that the fact that you're right about the fact that they gave up on Urban Meyer, like the players did. They weren't playing. There was a lot of business decisions being made. That needs to change. And I think that the fact that they've got a new coach, they've got a new entire coaching staff. I think they're going to come in and get a lot more out of the same talent that's there. And that's going to be an important part of this. And if they can get that changed, they can do a lot better than I think people are expecting from them. Not that I expect them to be a playoff team or anything like that, but there's more talent here than last year showed by quite a bit.
Well, I think Brandon Scherf is a great get, and he's an upgrade, in my opinion, over what they had, even with Andy Norwell. Just from a pro perspective, he's one of the best guards in the league. I think the Foysade Oluokun at linebacker, I think he's a tackling machine. I think he led the NFL in tackles in 2021 at 192, and pairs really nicely with Miles Jack there. And then Fatuasi, I think is how you pronounce it, a defensive tackle. I think he's going to give them kind of that run stuffing kind of a presence in the middle that they need, with a little bit of upside on pushing the pocket. Christian Kirk at wide receiver, I think, with DeAndre Hopkins and some of the other players there in Arizona, I think Christian Kirk does have an opportunity to kind of be Trevor Lawrence's kind of go-to release valve, like not only stretching the field, which he does have burner speed and be able to kind of hit home run type stuff from all over the place, but just a guy that he can check down to on third downs and so forth to move the chains is a nice option, along with Ingram at tight end, I think, which he specializes in that. So I think offensively they really did improve, and then defensively, if we can talk about the draft.
The draft is where
I thought that they really did improve a lot, but they're young. So, which is great with a team in this position. They have some room now.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they went and got Trayvon Walker with the first overall pick in the draft, defensive end out of Georgia, although he doesn't have to play defensive end. He's so athletically freaky. You can play him anywhere on the line. He can literally line up at nose tackle and still be dominant, which is why he was the first overall pick in the draft. I know the production wasn't really there at Georgia, but that's part because of all the talent around him. So he would set people up and they'd get the sack or whatever. But he's athletically freaky even for the NFL, and for him to be able to do everything that he does, he's going to make everyone around him better.
Were you surprised that he went number 1 overall?
I was, because he wasn't really thought of as in that conversation until the last 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden we were getting a lot of buzz from the national media, the people who were actually connected, saying that no, he was going to be the guy. Before that, everyone thought it was going to be Aiden Hutchinson, who went number 2. But
so this will be judged against Aiden Hutchinson, and
it will
maybe,
be.
yeah.
I don't have a problem with it. Like,
I don't either. I mean, the upside was clearly there, and that's the thing. This was kind of an upside pick, not proven production pick. That's a little scary in the NFL, but at the same time, coming from Georgia, you mentioned, the attributes that he has athletically and being in a defense that was number 1 in the nation, surrounded by talent and playmakers, and he wasn't being asked to be the guy. He was one of a group of guys. And so it'll be interesting to see how he functions.
And they moved him all over, and he did all those things, and he showed the ability to play at all those different positions. And that kind of like weapon for a defensive coordinator is nice to have. I mean, you saw it in Kansas City, who we'll talk about later, when they went and signed Frank Clark. He has that ability to move all over the line. Now his production and everything has fallen off greatly over the last couple of years for a lot of different reasons, but his ability to impact games because of his ability to move around became a major weapon, and that's what Walker is. And so I like that pick. I think that I mean, Hutchinson might have been a more sure thing, but he also is going to come from one spot. He's going to play on one end and not make anyone else better. He's just going to be super productive, where Walker's going to make everyone around him better.
Yeah, I thought their linebacker core really got improved. I mean, they picked up
Devin Lloyd.
And then Devin Lloyd was drafted to be kind of their middle linebacker. They already had Shaquille Quarterman. And then on the other side, with Trayvon Walker, they've got Clavon Chason there. That's a real nice rotation.
And they picked up Chad Muma in the 3rd round.
Yeah. So let's talk about Devin Lloyd and Chad Muma. I was curious about, because they moved up to get Devin Lloyd, got 27 overall, and then they selected Chad Muma at 70. Chad is probably going to be a weak side guy, whereas Devin Lloyd's going to be a middle linebacker. I didn't have any problem with them choosing these two players, because I think it really does improve. You take a look at the front 7 overall for this team, and they invested in that heavily with 3 out of the 4 top picks.
Yeah, and I mean, Muma's a guy, and Lloyd, both of them. I mean, they're not like there were flashier linebackers in this draft, but those two guys are going to be super productive. They
and Chad Muma's super fast too.
Yeah, I mean, they're athletically, they've got the things you need to be a productive NFL linebacker. Their tape is great. They've got great instincts. These are going to be long-term starters in the NFL, and they got 2 of them. So yeah, Walker up front, two linebackers. This is a team that's going to has a lot of young talent in their front 7.
So what did you think of the Luke Fortner pick at center from Kentucky at 65 overall?
Yeah, so that to me was the one that was a little surprising. I know that they wanted to give Trevor Lawrence some additional help, and center was one of those positions that's a little harder to find, and so they reached a little bit for Fortner. But honestly, he's got the traits to be a long-term starter. I just think that there were, at the moment, that there were other pieces they could have gone and gotten that are going to be more they're going to be more impactful early on. But I think Fortner can be a long-term starter in the NFL.
The other pick that I really liked is Monteric Brown at 222nd overall. The cornerback out of Arkansas, I thought was a really nice value pick at that spot in the draft. Gives them a little bit of depth overall as they move forward on the outside. And he's a guy that could play in the slot as well if he needs to.
Well, and they also got Gregory Jr. Around earlier at cornerback. So I mean, so think about it. They got their guy up front. They got 2 linebackers, and then they got 2 cornerbacks. And now the cornerbacks are late round picks, and we'll see if they make the roster and stick in the NFL. But especially Brown, who you mentioned, has upside. There's something to work with there. Now, it may be a year before they get solid production out of him, or he may wash out. But the talent, the upside to become a solid NFL player is definitely there, and you don't get a lot of that in the 7th round.
Yeah, and he's physical enough and has enough athletic upside to play special teams right away. So I think he makes the roster. And then this is a roster that's kind of void of a lot of depth and talent on the back end, and so I think he's there. Anything else on this team? Are you looking forward to seeing what they do? I mean, Doug Peterson spent a year out of the league, comes back in, accepts really probably the most difficult job in all of the NFL, to come in and take a team that is psychologically broken, lacking of a lot of talent, and working with a general manager in Trent Baalke, who you and I know better than most, as we spent some time in the NFC West and following the San Francisco 49ers. He can either build a team pretty decent, or he can destroy a team. And so I'm curious to know which way this thing goes, and if Doug Peterson has any say, any value that he can bring to that table as far as evaluating talent and influencing that a little bit. I'd be very curious to see how long his leash is there, if he's got 3 years, or if this is a year-to-year evaluation.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not a Trent Baalke fan. I watched him come in and destroy a very dominant 49er team, and just completely tear that roster apart and turn them into just a mess, where he got fired and they had to completely rebuild, and they've done that. They're back to being strong again, but he tore apart a dominant team. And so I was surprised he ever got another GM job, but he's done some things here that look like he's building, and we'll see if it works. I'm more interested in, Doug Peterson. I mean, we saw him go win a Super Bowl by having a great defense and enough offense. And even when his quarterback went down with injury and they had to bring in a backup, they still went on to win a Super Bowl with a backup quarterback. And that's really rare. But then everything fell apart for him. And when Frank Reich left, that coaching staff kind of started to fall apart. So who is Doug Peterson as a coach? Is he the guy that we saw early in his Philly tenure, or this the guy that we saw later? I'm wondering what that's going to look like, and how much, like you said, how much leash he's got. Because if he comes in and struggles a little bit at first, and this team doesn't take this big step forward, is he going to be gone in a year?
I
don't think he will. I hope not too. I think he's a better coach than people give him credit for because of his exit.
And I think the expectations are zero. And I think they want to see elevated play with Lawrence. I think that they want to see some things come together, some cohesion. I think that it all comes down to, does the team play for Peterson and stay with him? And can they eke out 5 or 6 wins and exceed expectations this year? I think that'll go a long way to ensuring that he's there long term, to at least see this thing out and see if he can build a winner. Kansas City Chiefs. Now, this team has been dominant since Mahomes showed up, along with Andy Reid, and this season was a bit challenging for them. I don't know that it necessarily went the way that they initially wanted it to, but I thought the recovery after the decision to part ways with Hill was outstanding, and they pivoted when they needed to pivot. They looked at their salary cap and made a decision on a player that's dynamic versus franchise stability, and they went with stability, Keith.
Oh yeah, and I'm all over stability when in terms of that. But Hill was more than just dynamic. He was unique. He was just this unique talent that teams didn't really have an answer for, and it didn't really matter what they tried to do defensively. He was still able to be productive, and I think that is that's why he was. They were able to get so much for him in trade, and why he signed a contract that was so big, and all of that.
Mhm.
But I don't think that they just rolled over and were like, okay,
They
fine.
didn't roll over.
They're like, we're just going to have to figure it out without him. They went from having one super elite weapon to having a core of receivers. Mahomes is going to have more weapons to deal with. He's not going to have to rely on hoping that the one guy can dominate in order to have productive passing game this year. They've got a lot more weapons.
I thought, okay, I agree with most of what you just said there. I do think though that beyond Hill last year and Kelsey, they really didn't have a lot, and so
That's
they
what I
overly.
mean.
Here's what I'm saying though. They overly depended, I think, on Kelsey and Hill to kind of make plays for them last year, and they struggled a little bit at times moving the ball consistently and so forth. And I think that was why, in the end, that they didn't get past where they got past in the playoffs. And so now that you sent Hill away, now really the only playmaker in that offense before anything else happened was Kelsey. And then they went out and they got Schuster, Smith-Schuster, and then also Valdez-Scantling. Now that those moves are great, but they don't make up for Hill alone. You're right. Instead of 1 and 2 targets, now they've got 3, but of maybe lesser value overall. But they did go out in the draft and then added Sky Moore. So now you take a look at their room. They've got 4 weapons, plus their running back room is excellent. Is it enough, Keith?
I think it is. I mean, because again, they went from having 2 weapons to having 4. And none of them are Hill's, talent level. None of them are game changing in the same way. But what they have now is if one of them if a defense focuses on one of them and shuts them down, there's other options. And that hasn't been the case, or that wasn't the case last year.
Right. Well, Sammy Watkins, was there, but they lost him. They lost him last year before last season. I think it was, a bigger loss than the team realized.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious because I think that you take a look at Juju Schuster-Smith or Smith-Schuster, and he wasn't everything that the Steelers needed him to be. And of course, we all understand that quarterback room there with Roethlisberger was diminishing. It was just bad. I'm curious though, because they only gave him a 1-year deal. So they gave him kind of a prove-it year deal, 1-year deal, $10 million. Whereas we know that the premier wide receiver salaries are exceeding 20 million now. So they gave him $10 million. It's a good value. I think it's a good risk reward situation for them. And then Marquez Valdez-Scantling was with Green Bay, and they gave him a 3-year, $36 million deal. And I don't know that necessarily Scantling is the better wide receiver out of the two. Now there's 2 of them, and they kind of do the same things. It'll be really interesting. And then Sky Moore, I think, has got a great upside at 54 overall in the draft. Kind of went exactly where everyone was expecting him to go, and he's a playmaker waiting to happen. But absolutely. He's a rookie, and he's going to need a little bit of time. We'll see. Patrick Mahomes can make anybody look good, I think. And so I'm very curious as to see, because I thought they had an excellent draft. Not just wide receiver room, but I think they were able to take that Hill compensation and really solidify their roster long-term with a bunch of young, fast talent and good picks overall, I thought.
Well, yeah. I mean, last year for this whole team, everything got off to that rough start, and they were like 3-4 at one point, and but then they turned it around and made that run and just were one of the better teams in the entire NFL after that point. But what held them back most of all was the defense. They just that defense had eroded and fallen apart, and they needed upgrades. They needed to fix that defense, and man, they did that in the draft in a very solid way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we can
and I
go
thought
through.
they added Justin Reed too. I'll say that in free agency, which I think helped solidify their safety situation. They had Tyrion Matthew, but he was going to be 31 this year, and Justin Reed's 25. And I think they went just with the younger player with upside there to help solidify that. So that was a good way to start. And then in the draft,
they drafted by Brian Cook out of Cincinnati, who's a safety.
Well, I was going to say that the Trent McDuffie and the George Karlaftis and the Brian Cook and the Leo Chanel picks, that's 4 out of the top 5 picks in them. They focused on defense. I thought that was excellent. And then Joshua Williams as well, with the next pick after Chanel. I just think that that's the way that they should have gone, is really help solidify that defense. Because that, with that offense, and I think it's going to be a good offense, the attention though needed to be on the defense, because I did think that they were lacking in that, and that really helps them win, is having a good defense to give their offense more opportunities.
Well, and one of the best value picks that they had in the entire draft was Darian Kennard, the guard, down in the 5th round, which is surprising that he went so low. I mean, this is a guy that he's gonna be a starter, and maybe not week 1, but he's got the talent. He's going to be a guy that makes plays, and
do you think they eventually move him inside him? And they've currently got him listed at right tackle. He's 3rd on the depth chart.
I think he's a guard.
I do too, and we talked about that during the pre-draft process.
Yeah. I thought he could stick at right tackle with the right team, because of his ability to run block and that kind of stuff. So I thought he could stick with the right team. Kansas City is not that team. And so he's a guard, but he's a guard that's going to make their running game better. And so, that's fine. I mean, this is a potential long-term starter on the offensive line. And if you can get a long-term starter in round 5, wow, you did some good things in the draft. And I think that's what they're looking at there. So all these defensive players, they added another cornerback. They drafted 3 cornerbacks. I like Jalen Watson, which they picked in the 7th round out of Washington State. He's a guy that I believe will stick on the roster for special teams at first, but has the talent to develop into a guy that will stick on the roster long term as a defensive player, not just a special teams guy. So just overall, they added a lot of talent and a lot of depth on the defense, and a couple of key offensive players as well, with a wide receiver and a guard. This was a great draft by this.
I thought the Brian Cook and Leo Chanel picks were my favorite picks overall for them. Now you can go back eventually and look at the George Karlaftis pick and say maybe that could end up turning out to be the best pick, or the Trent McDuffie pick, I think, which is really solid. Trent McDuffie makes up for his size, lack of size, with his stickiness and his agility and being able to cover and make plays on the ball. But George Karlaftis is really interesting. Early discussions in the draft process, when you're talking December, January, he was in a top 10 conversation, eventually dropped back down a little bit to kind of think where he was valued at, because he's more of a guy that's going to play the run for you a little bit, which I think is undervalued in the NFL, being able to set the edge. But he goes and pairs up now with Chris Jones and Frank Clark along the defensive line there. And it would be very interested to see how that rotation works. Currently listed as being a left side defensive end for them, with Frank Clark on the other side. What do you think of that? It seems like they're similar players.
They are similar players. Excuse me. So when they drafted Karlaftis, it was, yeah, he's similar to Frank Clark. And Frank Clark was not good last year. And certainly with his contract and lack of, general production and everything, I am very surprised that Frank Clark is on this roster. But it turned out they didn't end up needing that cap space, so they kept him around for another year. And we'll see how that goes. But Karlaftis gives them Frank Clark insurance. If Clark is the player he was a couple of years ago, then him and Karlaftis on this line together is going to be really rough on teams.
Mm-hmm.
If Frank Clark is the guy he was last year, he may not make this team, and Karlaftis just takes over that role, and the team will be okay. And that's kind of why I really liked that pick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't.
He's definitely the future. There's no question.
He is.
Yeah, and Frank Clark, is he has the talent. It's just a situation of, I think some players get this when they get to be around 30 years old, in that they just lose the mental edge for the game. Now, I'm not saying all players do that, but some players do. They get paid. The NFL takes its toll. Injuries add up over time. You're in pain, and it's harder to get up on Sundays and do your job. And Frank Clark may be in that situation. I don't know for sure, but I'm rooting for Frank Clark because I like him as a player. Want him to be successful, but I think that the George Karlaftis thing there was a pick for the future and insurance, just as you mentioned. I think that's where it's at. Anything else that you want to talk about? What are your expectations now for this team? Eric Bieniemy is still there. Can't seem to find a head coaching opportunity anywhere. Andy Reid, the head coach. The AFC is stacked. The AFC West is stacked. Does this team take the AFC West, Keith?
Man, I don't know. If they have a slow start like they did last year, they don't recover this year, because you're not looking at, the Raiders as the second, like last year's Raiders as the second best team in the division. Now you're looking at this year's Raiders with all that talent that they've added, or the Chargers with all the talent that they've added, or the Broncos that added a legit quarterback, and that was really what they were missing. You can't start off slow, and they know they need to come out and just and be the Chiefs from the very beginning if they want to win this division. I think they can. I think the fact that they loaded up on defense and made the adjustments last year that they needed to make. And, I mean, Mahomes early in the year was still trying to take all these shots downfield, even when the defenses were taking that away from him. And over the course of the season, he learned to be more efficient and more patient. And if he comes in with that same attitude, that same mentality, there's no reason why this offense should start slow again. And I think that this is a team that they're still in that class at the top of the AFC, even with the AFC being so much better.
Yeah,
they really are.
I do think that I'm watching this wide receiver room. It seems like there's a lot of pressure on these guys to fill the holes that were there and to be successful, and the offensive line. They did franchise tag Orlando Brown at left tackle. They've still got Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey at center, now is one of the best centers in the NFL, if not the best. They do have the offensive line for protection. The question is, can those wide receivers get open? Can their running game with Edwards-Helaire stay healthy and be available and do the job that they need? It'll be interesting. I just think that they diminished slightly on offense, but they picked that up a little bit on defense, and we'll see how that balances out.
I think they're significantly better on defense. For me, what it comes down to is, I think you and I are in different spots on Smith-Schuster, because you go back a couple of years ago, and he was generally considered, in the top 10 in the NFL, as just a dominant outside receiver.
Mhm.
And then, unfortunately, he played with, yeah, Big Ben has the name, but you look his actual on-field play, he was genuinely terrible the last couple of years. And now all of a sudden, Smith Schuster can't get open. No, I think he played with a terrible quarterback. And so how did he go from being, a top 10 in the NFL receiver to being a guy that had to sign a prove it deal? Well, that's what seriously bad quarterback play will do to a receiver. So I don't I I'm not that concerned. I think he's gonna show up and be significantly better than some people are considering.
Excellent. All right. Well, I didn't get your completely truthful, honest, accurate answer as to how the Kansas City Chiefs are going to finish this year in that division. You just kind of ended it with, I just don't know.
Nobody
Um,
knows that
I know
division.
it's so tough. And now I'm just not saying, I asked you about the AFC West. Can they win the AFC West? I didn't even talk about the bigger picture in the AFC, which there are at least 10 teams that are competing for
Mhm.
7 spots. Um,
Yeah,
and if Kansas City falls off a little bit, you mentioned it, they need to start fast, they need to finish strong. If they start slow and finish okay, they're out.
I don't know
And
about
because
that.
there's so many other teams that are
Yeah,
equally talented that are waiting to fill that void.
yeah. I mean, this is a incredibly tough AFC. Much tougher than it's been the last few years. A lot of talent migrated from the NFC to the AFC this offseason. And now all of a sudden you have this whole group of teams. You ask, can they win the AFC West versus can they win the AFC? If you can win the AFC West, you can win the AFC. That's the thing is, as good as the rest of the AFC is, any team that wins the AFC West has the talent and ability to win the entire AFC because the AFC West is the class of the NFL as divisions go, and by a wide margin because all 4 of those teams are legit contenders. That's how good that division is. Um, the 3rd place team in the AFC West is still a threat to go to the Super Bowl once the playoffs begin.
Wow.
Because that's how good the AFC West is. Then you throw that in with Cincinnati and Buffalo, and maybe Cleveland if their quarterback gets to play. Um, I mean, this is a really tough year to try and be the team coming out of the AFC. But I'll tell you this: whoever does come out of the AFC is going to be the favorite in the Super Bowl by quite a bit. I mean, I honestly think that the winner of the AFC is going to be favored Super Bowl Sunday by maybe not a touchdown, but it's going to be way more than we're used to for Super Bowl
And it might be, and
odds.
it might be a tougher road too, because those AFC West teams have to play each other twice
Hmm.
per year. Maybe a team like Buffalo has an easier road. Maybe a
They
team
do
like
have an easier
Cincinnati
road.
has an easier road. I don't know
I,
yet. We'll
it's hard.
find out.
It's hard to say that Cincinnati's going to have an easy road. I mean, that division's rough too.
What I'm saying is there might be a team that has a better record at the end of the year, where the media may take a look at and favor them. But sometimes the grit that you need to get through the harder division to get there prepares you better to enter the playoffs and take
Yeah.
care of business. So we'll see. I think you might be right. You might be on
We've seen a
something.
lot of that on the NFC side and the NFC West the last few years where Seattle Rams, 49ers, they beat up on each other so much during the season. Not always the favorite, they're not always the 1 seed or any of that coming into the playoffs, but those teams are hard outs because they're hard to take down once the playoffs begin, and you're going to see that this year. I mean, the Chiefs might come into um, the AFC playoffs as the 6 seed or the 5 seed, but don't count them out in any game, right? They're going to be a team no one wants to play, um, because that talent is still there. that championship pedigree is still there. Patrick Mahomes is still an elite quarterback. So,
and Andy Reid can coach against anybody.
Andy Reid is one of the best coaches in NFL history.
Period. All right. Good show, Keith. Thanks. As always, follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can follow me at Alvstad NFL. Follow the show on your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe, share it, all that good stuff. Until next time, take care, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Bill is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_Playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.